Good morning, everyone. And if it's afternoon for you, then good afternoon, everybody. So you're joining Sadeya's Chaat Masala today. What is Chaat Masala? Chaat Masala is guest lecture series. It highlights and honors designers from South Asian diaspora around the globe. Chaat masala is an omnipresent mixture of spices that creates an unforgettable explosion of flavors. And if you have eaten chaat and you exactly know what I'm talking about. So, this series intends to memorialize the dynamic South Asian designers and educators who center South Asian design histories, social, and cultural narratives in their creative endeavors. Sadhya invites educators, researchers, historians, and practitioners from various design disciplines to share their vibrant practices and journeys. So I'm Archana Shekhara, and I'm the chair of Sadhya for this year, and I'm also the founder of Sadhya. So it's a pleasure and a delight to have Professor Ruki Neuhold-Ravikumar joining us. I've been following her in my grad student days since 2007, and she's done some amazing work. And really an honor for you to accept our invite, Ruki. So, who is Ruki Ravikumar? So, with over 2 decades of experience in design, education, and leadership, Ruki Nehol Ravikumar has led dynamic and diverse communities of artists, designers, and scholars committed to excellence, innovation, and social impact throughout her award winning career in the arts, design, cultural, and educational sectors. She has an MFA in design from Iowa State University and a professional certificates from Harvard, Northwestern, and Yale universities. She has held leadership roles on nationally recognized boards and held prestigious positions in nationally revered organizations such as Smithsonian Museum Institution. Ruki is presently a professor of practice and graphic design and a researcher in residence at her alma mater, Iowa State University, where she has also been recognized as a commencement speaker and a distinguished design alumna. So, welcome, Ruki. Thank you so much for your generosity in joining us. And we are very eager to hear your presentation, Rasam and Reasoning. What more? We all love food, right, as South Asians, and that too South Indian. I'm a South Indian as well. And when you said Rasam, I was like, yeah, cool. So please welcome and please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you so much, Archana, for the invitation and the warm welcome and the very kind introduction you've just given me. It's such a pleasure to speak to all of you. Today, my topic is titled Rasam and Reasoning. Rasam for me is absolutely soul food. It helps me with my mind, it helps me with my sinuses. And of course, it helps me just feel like I'm at home. My favorite recipe involves 3 teaspoons pepper, garlic, some cumin, tamarind, tomato, some oil, turmeric, chilies, mustard seeds, curry leaves, a little bit of coriander, salt, and asafoetida. I like it spicy. But growing up, I always wanted a little bit of rasam during my school exams. I seriously believed that it helped my cognitive abilities. And now there's actually research that is in medical journals that proves that each of these ingredients actually helps you either with your digestive abilities or with your cognitive abilities. So I'm very grateful that there is scientific proof now that rasam is good for you. Rasam over time is called charu for the Telugus, rasam for the Tamilians, but it is something that I think for me especially has been a symbol of comfort. Growing up, it's something that I felt psychologically helped me during my exams. And maths was especially a subject that I had a very engaged parent, my dad, who is a naval architect, and he took a special interest in helping me for my math exams. And in order to impress him, I felt like I needed Rasam right before my math exams to make sure that I aced them. Rasam has become a global phenomena, and it's known as a mulgatani soup over the world. And as the British took it to many parts of the world, the recipe has gotten modified. And even as people have modified that recipe to adjust the spice levels, they've even added chicken and fowl, and this recipe has seen various adjustments as the recipe has traveled westward from India. Mulgatwani is basically the breakdown of the Tamil words mulaga, which is pepper, and thani, which is water. And so you can see that has become mulgatani soup over time. The reason I chose the title Rasam and Reasoning is because when I grew up in Madras, and the city was called Madras when I was growing up, it is now Chennai, is that it's something that I really enjoyed eating. And to date, when I think of just something that helps me feel comfortable, for me, that's something that I think of comfort food, rasam, and rice with some good potato fry is what comes to mind. And when I tell people that I'm doing a talk on rasam and reasoning, the first thing I hear is that you can take the girl out of Madras, but you can't take the Madras out of the girl. And even though I'm a naturalized citizen of the United States now, rasam is really what reminds me of home. So I immigrated to the United States well into the early 2000s. So it was 2000. And when people ask me, when did you know you were going to be a designer? I didn't. I was a very, very creative young person where I tried very many creative things with a foundation in the arts, where I tried everything from painting and drawing to pottery. But I was also extremely entrepreneurial. And so with those entrepreneurial and artistic skills, I knew I had a voice, but I did not know what that purpose was. And when you're young and in India, you learn about the concepts of lines. You learn early on geographic boundaries of lines, and one of those boundaries of lines was that line of control in Jammu and Kashmir, where you learned about the India-occupied Kashmir and the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So you are familiar with lines as political boundaries that separate people, and you learn about lines as places of control, geographic and political boundaries. You also learn a very simplistic definition of line in your geometry classes, and in math as the shortest distance between 2 points. But for me, I started to learn about lines in a more social way, and a line of control became more personal, especially as you start to commute as a young person and start to see that if you've ever traveled in a local bus, this is your experience. And you learn that there's a men's side and a woman's side in a public bus. And this is where you start to see that your personal boundaries are tested. And as your parents start to really kind of look out for your safety, your political boundaries, your social boundaries start to become tighter for you. And so for me, that boundary became 45 minutes from my house. And so your choices of where you can be educated how far your job can be are all become very, very limited. And so that line of control for you is a very different concept. And that's the point where you realize that as a young woman, you may be entrepreneurial, you may be creative, and you may be asking big questions about purpose, but you hear the word no a lot. And in asking the no and in trying to figure out how do you work and problem solve around the no was really how I found my pathway to design. And it's when I chose to immigrate. And it was more to find the freedom of choice and to pursue my own pathway, to figure out what kind of profession I wanted to pursue, also to pursue more choices on not only what field I wanted to pursue, but also more freedom of choice on who I wanted to be with, my own choice of life partner, and really to explore freedom and increase that that line of control around me was probably my first instinct then. And so in terms of exposure to design, it was more in the sense of trying to figure out how to problem solve around the notion of no. And so when you first start to learn about design, you get introduced to these primary shapes. And so your understanding of line starts to expand. And you learn about shapes that include space, and you start to learn about shapes that exclude space. And in a very simplistic term, you start to become aware of space. But what really started to challenge my thinking was when a professor started to talk to me about white space. And a professor said my designs didn't have enough white space. And I thought, what is this white space? Especially when you've lived in a place like this, the concept of white space is extremely jarring. And this really started to capture my curiosity and my attention. And you start to think about why is it that when you come from a South Asian country, do you not have that notion of white space? Why is it that white space is seen as sophisticated in design? And you start to explore the differences in aesthetic between Eastern and Western cultures. And I really started to get more interested in a universal understanding of what was beautiful about design, and was universal design truly universal? And those started my initial inquiries into cross-cultural design. And in those initial inquiries, I think I really started to learn more about my own culture. And I really started to ask more provocative questions about Eastern and Western differences in aesthetics. I wrote essays on the whiteness of white space. I started to question color aesthetic preferences, about how white was not seen as such a sophisticated color in Eastern cultures, about how we wear white at funerals and how white is worn at weddings. In Western culture, how red is a more powerful color in Eastern cultures. And it really started to explore my cross-cultural curiosities in design, aesthetics. And it was my early area of research as a designer, an educator, and where I started to explore more. And they really say that once you leave your home country is when you start to learn more about it, when you create that separation between you and when you step out and people ask you more about where you're from and ask you more questions that you really start to learn more about who you are. And so it was really at that point that I got more interested about Indian culture and what it was that I had previously surrounded myself with. And so I found that I went from being a tourist where I was just looking and observing and a designer to now being a traveler where I was more curious. I was asking more questions and I was more of a design educator and I was learning more and helping others navigate this world in a completely different way. And at that point, I got asked a really important question. And that was, if you could have any job in the world, what would it be? That's a question that you get asked as a child. And then no one asked you that question as an adult. And when I was asked that question as a child, I would often say Batman. And I would get told no, because that's a job for a man. It never got occurred to the adults in my life that the job was fictional. So it didn't matter whether it was for a man or a woman. But when I got asked this question, if I could have any job in the world, what would it be? It really got me dreaming again. And I started to think about what had I learned from my tourist to traveler phase and my designer to design educator, and what did I want to do next? And it's in that inquiry phase where I started to think about what had I learned, and how could I start to ask those questions and look at those lines and shapes and boundaries that I'd created for myself as a designer, and start to look at the spaces that I had inhabited and how could I ask those questions in different ways and translate those questions into a different context. And that's really what took me to the Smithsonian Institution. Cooper Hewitt, more specifically, as their director of education. And it really helped me think about design in a much larger way, where I got to look at how do we talk to kids and expose them to design at a much earlier phase where they're asking questions early on. And why do we only talk to adults about design when we are surrounded by design all the time? Could we look at exposure to design early? Could we integrate design into curriculum? Could we help people see problem solving as design and not talk about design purely on an aesthetic level? My job description at that point was Teach America Design, and I found this enormously exciting and fulfilling and challenging. I also got to work with teachers, K through 12, to get to see that if you were teaching math, you could still talk about design. And if you were teaching science, you could still talk about design because all of those concepts were relatable. I think this pushed me as a teacher, as a designer, on every level to think about not only teaching and learning, but also about design and how you could make connections in areas that you didn't see before. And how concepts that you learned before, those simplistic concepts about lines, spaces, shapes, that how you could now talk about them early on as design and problem solving as design as well. And how I had never ever been introduced to design until fairly late in life, and how kids today are so resourceful, how they hack solutions all the time, and yet no one talks to them about their capacity to problem solve. And if someone did that early on, perhaps they might find a pathway to design early on as well. This also took me to talking to designers who were late in their career about how they could perhaps be better ambassadors for the field and how they could talk about the value of being a designer and talk about not just what did it mean giving back to your field? Could they talk at a higher level to elevate the field on a national level and be better advocates for themselves, their peers, for their community? And what did it mean to teach at that level? So, as a cross section, when you start to talk about teaching design to someone who's 4 years old and to someone who's 80 years old, but to someone who knows nothing about design and to someone who's an expert in design, it really starts to push you from being to start to see future possibilities. And you start to think like a kid again. It starts to make you think about anything is possible. And I started to gain new exposure to audiences of all kinds of backgrounds and ask bolder questions where I was starting to ask questions about mobility and the future of it. Who was being included? Who was being excluded? How could we put people at the center of what we were doing? During the pandemic, I got to ask really complex questions about how design could help people not feel so isolated. And we created this publication to help people who were isolated in homes and in memory care facilities, and to help them maintain their motor skills. And how could they connect concepts of the past with concepts of the present? And I think taking those design skills where you ask a complex question and you break it down and you start to ask the why, and you start to really put people at the center of everything that you do. And it's no longer about shapes, but it's about thinking about systems, is really where I got to think about the why of design and why we do what we do. I got to think about kids who had no access to the internet and why it was not necessarily a technology problem, but a human problem, and created bilingual publications for them so that they were not isolated and we could bridge the learning divide for them. And to do problem solving at this level, equipped with nothing but a design degree, made me think about design at a completely different way, that I was able to translate design and the design process to really adapt what we had learned in new and different ways, going from a tourist to really thinking about the systemic problems that I had previously run away from, that I was now able to solve more systemic problems now, that I was evolving from tourist to traveler to guide, and from designer to educator to executive leader. And I was really using the same design skills. I was using the same thinking skills. I was just adapting them in new environments. So what now? And that's the place that I am now, is as I think about, as I've made this journey from tourist to traveler to guide and designer to design educator to executive leader, have I done my best work yet? I think I have more to do. And as I think about what problems have I not solved, are there bigger problems to solve yet? I think there are. And so as I think back and I think about what now, of course, there's a podcast on it. I can't help but reflect on something that Sam Altman said, where he said, imagine a world where part of what we fulfill our mission is that we just make great tools that massively impact human ability and everything that we see. And so I think about, is there a tool set that I can make to problem solve better? And what are those problems that I can help affect and really make a change? And I go back to those questions about purpose. And this is the point that I'm at. And so as I reflect back over my 20 years, I also come back to my culture and that original place of Rasam. And there are things that I have experienced as an immigrant, as a woman of color, as and as a gay woman in America. And there are things that as I mentored people here, I learned that there are cycles that are still going on that maybe need to be broken. As I see some people still struggle to fit into workplaces, as I see that DEI is making an exit from the workplace, I think about how can people still find a place to work? How can people come to work on a daily basis and still be highly productive? I think about all the times when things were said to me and I was stumped. I didn't know what to say. I was ill-equipped. I didn't have the tools to either respond or simply navigate the situation. It was a dig at my culture, or a dig at my age, or a dig at my gender. And I knew I was upset. And I know that nobody goes to work to be insulted. So how can we get to a place where we can be more civil, be more human, and go to work where we can help our colleagues understand who we are and still be our productive selves? I like to think of it in terms of positive intent, that people are innately curious, and sometimes it's just in the wrong delivery. And that we don't need an enormous number of rules to help us navigate that workplace. So what are those tools that can help us? And so this is where I've started to think of it. And so this is a very early preview of what I'm working on. And I'd just love to share a little bit of that with you. What I started to think about was, as executives, as we've started to navigate, there's been a huge pendulum shift in the workplace. From the Industrial Revolution, which was really an age of conformity, of people working in factories where we were all doing the same thing, there's been a huge shift to bring your full self to work. And in the bringing your full self to work, we have not realized how to deal with all of our differences. And in dealing with those differences, we have seen that DEI training has not necessarily worked in all workplaces. So how do we help each other communicate and learn each other well? In my personal experiences, I have learned that people are curious. They're curious about who you are, where you're from, and want to learn more. When you are welcomed into a new workplace, you are celebrated, but sometimes people are fearful of your difference. When you're celebrated as a new executive, often there's a meet and greet, and that ritual of celebration comes often with food. There was a strong push towards building cultures and communities of support with food. And there was a strong push of leadership where leaders were encouraged to create new rituals with their teams, and those included cooking with teams, eating with teams, and this is where differences were recognized too. And so I started to think more about that. And this is where I noticed that especially people from different cultures who would bring their foods in and your peer colleagues would look at your food and often look at it and be skeptical about what did you bring to our lunch today? And I'm not so sure about the smell of what it is. And that looks interesting, but I don't think I want to try it. And then with Indian food, a lot of people would say, oh, I either like curry or hate curry. And in that moment, you didn't want to necessarily educate them on how curry was just sauce. So you don't have to love it or hate it. And there were moments where you have the time to make that education or not have the time to make that level of education. But in my experiences, I learned that what people often had a real issue with was cumin because of the real pungent smell that it has. So I decided to take this lapel pin that I wear often, which you're seeing on the screen here, and weave it into my lapel pin. And so now what I'm working on is a communication tool with this brooch that I have, where I'm weaving in cumin seeds into the lapel pin. It has a lot more going on. So I also have some felt, these cumin seeds, and I've woven in some typography as well. And it has the aroma of cumin and confidence, because I want to start a new conversation, not just about educating you about the ingredient cumin, but also about getting more comfortable about having a South Asian executive in the workplace. And so how can we learn more about the ingredients in each other's food before you get skeptical about what it is that you're seeing? And could we have more conversations around the things that you fear before you fear them? I've also often gotten the comment of how I speak well. And I find that comment to be rather strange, because I grew up in India going to an English medium school. I was in a debate team. I took many opportunities to participate in elocution competitions. And so when I come across that compliment, I am confused at times. So I tried to think about how do I respond to that comment in a way that I accept the compliment, but I can also offer more education. And this is really the point where I thought more about Rasam and reasoning. And reasoning, there are many different kinds of reasoning, but I draw more on inductive reasoning, where we really rely on our sense of observation. And I think as immigrants, we do that well, where we look at the world around us, we observe, and that's what helps us assimilate. And so I've taken the ingredients, the historic spices, and I've started to create pieces of jewelry so that people can really ask about these ingredients and ask about the spice profile of these and start to talk about what it is that really inspires us to be more vocal, ambitious, loud-spoken, open-minded, and strong people. Because spices are not quiet in any means. And so once you bite into one of these, you know that it is out there and outgoing. And so it speaks very much to how many opinions we come with. And so it's really starting to talk about the capacity that we have within us to vocalize and say what's on our mind. And so I'm really starting to use some of these ingredients, parts of our food and our cuisine, to articulate the intricate levels of our personalities, who we are, and start to use them as a place for conversation, integrating them with my executive wear, and how can we use what we have to start new conversations with people. My goal is eventually to start to look at reasoning, to look at how can we create a line of statement pieces with what we have. So you're seeing the beginnings of my new body of work, which I hope to launch next year. I've just started to release a few pieces at various conferences. I'll be doing another release at the October conference in San Diego, where I'm telling short stories from my life and lived and work experience, where my goal again is conversation. I'd like to create tools. I'd like to bring in more balance into the workplace. I'd like for us to get to a place of civility. And I believe that humanly, we're all interested in each other and we want to talk to each other. But how can we do that in a way where we can ask each other questions, learn from each other, and get to a place where we're truly interested and in each other's culture, and can still not have the mental tax of identity and belonging compromise our productivity in the workplace. And so I'm hoping that with a nice, stiff, peppery amount of rasam, that I will produce this body of work over the next year. And that's really, for me, what's next. So I'm hoping that whoever's on here will have some questions for me, or maybe there's something in the chat, but I want to stop at this point and thank you very much for your attention.
Oh my, how amazing. How inspiring. And I love how you're bringing in food into your narratives, into your research, and telling stories through food, which is exactly what I'm doing as well. So when I first saw the title and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember in my grad school days, I did a project about comparing my garam masala box to graphic design. And love it, Ruki, the way that I mean, thank you so much for talking about what does it mean to understand white space, right? And then so we coming as from South Asia, and then the understanding of white space is really not there. We struggle with what a white space even feels like or looks like. I read this one book by Kenya Hara, the book White, and then so where he talks about white space in a Japanese understanding with Japanese aesthetics, and that was amazing. And I also recently read Sarita Sundar's essay about white space and how she kind of talks about it as in with an Indian identity. But oh my gosh, so much to unpack with what you just shared. And then your recent engagements of doing some fashion design work and graphic design. That's amazing.
Well, thank
A
you.
necklace or a brooch of like these beautiful spices and to carry it on this executive wear is just gorgeous. I would love to have one.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would love to see. I mean, if anybody is interested in asking questions, please feel free to unmute and ask, or you can even post questions on chat, whatever is easy for you.
Yeah, I decided to work with executive wear because it's not just material, it's also a repository of stories and histories. Um, each piece carries an imprint of its previous life, like boardroom meetings, high-stake negotiations, all of the invisible labor of maintaining a professional facade. So in repurposing these items, I want to kind of dismantle the traditional narratives that they embody and then reconstruct them into something that challenges our preconceptions. So that's partly why I'm working with my executive wear, and my goal is that these will eventually become visual aids for future workshops, where people can make their own statement pieces, because age, gender, culture, and sex are often seen as such fixed categories. So in my work, I'm just aiming to highlight the fluidity and intersectionality. And just by deconstructing and reassembling these, hopefully we can just see how these overlap, clash, and coexist.
Mhm. Wow, very profound and amazing and inspiring. I see Mohammed also has been commenting on chat continuously. Thank you, Mohammed, for joining. Mohammed teaches, Mohammed is the secretary for SADEA, and he teaches design at University of Cincinnati. And Mohammed saying, true that the wording of white space and negative space as well as, and thank you so much, Ruki, for sharing such an enlightening talk with us, much deconstructing. And there is Mohammed now.
Hi, Mama.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk. I had a little cold today, but I really enjoyed your talk. I heard about you from Artana a lot, but I was delighted to see you in person. I mean, meeting you over here.
Thank
Really
you.
loved it. I
Thanks.
want to know, is there any, you said like you have done some workshops. Is it with the students? I mean, with this new venture, have you done
Uh,
anything with the students now? It's just your
no,
own.
these are actually just for adults who are navigating, identity and belonging in the workplace and want to tackle having difficult conversations with their colleagues about any topic. And they shouldn't necessarily need a systemic solution. This is about how they can just navigate talking to their colleagues on a more human level, and how a workshop like this can sometimes just make it more comfortable for colleagues to talk to each other, learn about each other, and understand how to appreciate each other's differences, but coexist and work alongside each other.
Yeah, we recently had an DEI workshop in our school. We had a different kind of a workshop, but I think yeah, I can introduce you to them. I think it will be very useful because we don't have a lot of people of color in our program, and that can be very useful. Not just the people of color, but there are other identities that you're talking about that can be
Yeah.
really helpful, of
Well,
course.
most DEI workshops operate on a very definitional level, and they expose you to, what is intersectionality and what are all these, but they don't get to a more personal level of who is the colleague sitting right next to you and what it is that um, they would like you to know about them, and how can you work with them. And so that is really where the breakdown often happens, is ultimately you don't know what is making your colleague uncomfortable. And it's very simple things, because sometimes I can just tell you that you've been mispronouncing my name for the last 10 days. And if you knew that, you would correct it immediately. And it's just, but if it keeps continuing for years, that kind of sentiment festers, and then you really feel like you don't belong. So how can you adjust those very simple things before they escalate? And how do you create a platform for those kinds of conversations? And training does not create that kind of environment. So it's creating a place where you can have more personal storytelling, and you need visual aids for that kind of storytelling. So I'm hoping to create a workshop using my personal stories, and then empowering others to create their own personal stories and their own visual aids, because everybody has something that is important to them about their identity that they want to keep relevant in the workplace, but still want to just do their job. And that is really what we need to ultimately bring that balance back to. And it is really about balance. So we don't need to shift the pendulum back to complete conformity. And so how do we get to a place of balance? And the conversations need to be about that.
Thank you.
Nirupa, you have your hand.
Yeah.
You're on mute.
Thank you so much. It was very thought-provoking, Ruki. I've had to reframe my identity like throughout the time you've been speaking, because when you said Madras has not left me, the girl might have left Madras, but Madras never left the girl. I also call Madras Madras. And it actually had me thinking about identity, because I think I just want to start saying that I'm South Indian living in America, even though I have an American passport, I'm Indian first and American second. But that's really not what my question is about. My question is actually about transitions, and you know my story, Ruki. I mean, I'm on my chapter 2 or 3 vocationally and professionally. I'm kind of going into new careers at this point, and design thinking and sort of DIY design literacy is what helped me navigate 2 things. One is ambiguity and problem solving. I'm currently surrounded by so many adults right now in their late 30s to mid 40s that are going through huge career transitions. And people are getting laid off left and right. We are getting disintermediated in so many ways. My question to you is, as an educator, for adults who don't have the opportunity to go to university at this point, what would be maybe 2 to 3 foundational design skills that they just need to kind of get in their real life curriculum alongside like coding Python, or I don't know, learning to invest,
Yeah, I think those are good questions. Learning to learn is such an important skill. I think people underestimate that learning is an effort, that it doesn't just come by osmosis, that in order for you to, that learning is a process, that you actually, like, for knowledge, for information to become knowledge, you actually have to work at it, that you have to practice it, that you have to absorb that information. And there's a process in which that is why you would go to a university, is that there are exercises that instructors are giving you. There's a retention process that they're working on. And so if you're going to facilitate that process yourself, then you are designing all those interventions yourself. And so how are you going to do that? And so that is where you are investing that time, is figuring out, if you're going to learn something, where, how are you going to retain the information? What are you going to practice? How are you going to practice it? How are you going to apply it in order for you to then, continue with that new body of knowledge? So learning how to learn, I think, is such an important process for everybody to figure out for themselves. And not everyone takes the time to do that. Where everyone thinks that I'll just take a class, or do something online, but online learning is not for everyone, because it's, again, information doesn't just like slap you in the face and come to you directly. And that's where I think you or anyone else who can't necessarily go to a school has to first sit down and figure out, how do I learn? And what is the best way for me to learn? Is it talking to people? Is it by making something? And that is so critical. because as an adult, you are learning every day, all the time. You are learning how to navigate the world. You are learning, you're getting information all the time, and you're learning and unlearning things. But you have to figure out what is right for you. And that is the most important part. As when you stop paying attention to that, is when I think you lose that critical ability, right?
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ruki, there's a question on chat by Anya, who's joining us actually from Germany. So that's wonderful. The question is, she says, I also teach design and art in Germany at the university. I've never thought about white spaces, but your perception, it's true. My question would be, what are the urgent tasks of designers till 2030 are in your opinion? I highly value your time and sharing your thoughts.
So I think I've started to, the way I teach now is very different from the way I taught earlier in my career. And I think now I think more about what are our short-term goals as educators and long-term goals as educators, and why a student comes to you. And I think short term they come for job preparedness, but the long game for an educator is that preparing them for a trajectory of purpose. And once they've gotten that first job, they will not be at that first job for a long time. Then what? And giving them the tools to navigate the then what. And for me, I think the strong foundation and design helped me ask the right questions and continue to apply design in a holistic way, no matter what the transition was, and being able to, I think, take in the world and its changing conditions in a way where you are able to apply reasoning, where you're able to apply problem solving, where you're able to learn, teach yourself to, learn how to learn. I think that in a way you really start to appreciate the investment you made in your education, and start to see the arc of your learning
Full design
is really how I look at it. And so I think that's the way now I teach, is what is the short-term goal and the long-term goal, and why? Like, why is the student really there? What is what excites them? So I always say, okay, what do you want to do as soon as you graduate, and then what? And then help them see that there should be a then what, that there is a much longer arc to their life, and that they should be considering deeper purpose after, that the first job is just the first job, but there's going to be so much more excitement after that too. And that's what this education's about. It's going to prepare you for so much more. I hope that helps.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, as educators, we want to showcase or share our whatever that we know, of course, with a little bit of understanding, whatever we know with our students. But then we also want that leave with a larger, bigger question and be like, what next? Because students are always looking at short term. It's like, oh, I need to finish this assignment so I can get whatever grade, and then so when I graduate, I'll find this job. But then asking that bigger question of what next. So yeah, that's really, that is a thing, right? Even when we ask, like right now, I'm thinking of myself and I'm like, okay, what next for me too? And what is our next trajectory in 5 years? But that was good. You're making us all think now. So
Yeah, I think at this point, I'm still asking, have I made my best work yet? And I think that's what's driving this body of work,
mhm.
is, have I solved, like, I think I failed as an executive in stopping some cycles where If we're still having ageism and sexism and some of those issues in the workplace, then did I do my part when I was an executive? And how, if I was experiencing them and the next generation after me is still experiencing them, then what can we do to stop that cycle? And how can we make it more productive in the workplace? So that's where I'm thinking about, as a designer, what is a tool set that I can design to have better conversations? And so that's what brings me to this body of work. And I think then I will ask more questions later about, is that my best work yet? And that's what will take me to my next question, I suppose. And I think that's what should motivate everybody is, have you made your best work yet?
And that becomes impactful, right? Not just for yourself as a designer, educator, but then how are you impacting others and then other people's lives? And you're also empowering others um, to kind of understand through your senses or through your understanding. You're giving them an opportunity to think broader. And then I love when you said learning never ends. You keep learning. And then so how do you keep doing that and keep asking questions and be like, I mean, as educators we do that, like, as a part of our research interest, and be like, but then you keep asking questions like, how do I do, what is my next body of work, what's next for me? So I really truly and grateful for your honesty and transparency, and how you started your life as a designer, and then, like, back home in India, and then how you came here, and then all of the wonderful ladders that you have climbed, and then being extremely transparent about that and be like, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I have to say. That was gorgeous. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity for me to share really rough work, because I just showed it to you all in sketch format. But I'm hoping to have more finished work next year. And I hope that you'll come see it wherever it is. And that when it's ready to be workshopped, that you will be ready to host some.
Oh, absolutely. And Nirupa has a question. Are you doing work with corporates with EDI, introducing a more authentic language of engaging on the subject matter?
Yes. The
That
short answer is yes.
Yes. I mean, we are doing it too at ISU. I'm a part of the President's Advisory Council for EDI. I'm looking at faculty and staff success. I chair that subcommittee. I would love to invite you to our school, and then, like, so we can further this conversation, because the designer's mindset and applying design thinking is a little different than others. So I would love to
Well, I
have.
think what happened nationally, as I talked about the pendulum shift, but also I think, most national and corporates and others, no one had a problem with diversity, no one had a problem with inclusion, but equity became a sticky point because equity started to clash with merit. And I think that's where companies started to have an issue with, how do we talk about this? And especially in a capitalist economy, how do you talk about, you have, even with like white families that didn't grow up in the best circumstances, but have worked really hard to come up. How do you talk to them that they don't deserve a place at the table? And so equity did fly in the face of merit. And so that's where I think the DEI conversation started to fall apart. But people did not have a problem with diverse voices at the table or including communities. And so that is, I think, where we do need to talk about like where did we start to, have an issue, and where did that conversation fall apart, and where can we get to a place of balance and where we don't go back to a complete conformity again because we could not resolve that conversation on equity. I think that's really where we need to regain, get back to having these tools and talking on a more human level.
I'm also looking at time. Any other questions, please? Well, thank you so much, Ruki, for joining us, for your generosity. We really appreciate that. And we will soon be releasing the video on our YouTube channel, and all of the folks for joining. And I see lots of new folks. So thank you so much for joining and for supporting Sadea's efforts, for bringing diverse scholars into our space and sharing. Our next event is going to be Chai Time in December, and we are going to talk about what does it mean to be a South Asian designer in the United States, or design educator in the United States. We did the first part in May, and we are doing the second. There was so much conversation that was happening, so we decided to continue the conversation in December. So hope to see you all, and have a wonderful fall semester if you're teaching, or if you're not, then have an amazing October, and then keep coming to Sadia events and all of the podcasts. So again, Ruki, thank you so much. Really, really a pleasure knowing you, and all of the stuff that you have done, and opening up avenues for us South Asians. Thank you so much. You take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful and very kind audience. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody, and you all take care. Bye-bye.